Alright, now let's start using these function equations to model real-world situations. So, suppose that starting at age 22, you begin to save for retirement. You already have $5,000 in savings from selling your car, and additionally, you have $3,600 taken from your paycheck every year and put into your retirement account. Now, creating these equations to describe these real-world situations is something we're going to do a little later. But what I want us to be able to do now is, if we're given an equation, using it to our advantage. So we have two equations below, and in the first one, we're going to have K equal our retirement savings. And the variable H is going to equal our age in years. Note that the slight difference in the second equation is that we have this variable W, which represents the number of years since you were 22. So one variable represents our age, one represents the number of years since we were 22. Alright, so in our first question, how much will we have saved after 20 years of saving when we are 42 years old? So first things first, I want to concentrate on when we are 42 years old. Well, in our first equation, we have a variable that represents our age. So if we want to know how much we have in savings when we're 42, all we need to do is substitute a 42 in for this variable, which represents our age. So our savings will be equal to 5,000 plus 3,600 times 42 minus 22. Just substituting 42 in for our age. And now I'm confident that you can go ahead and figure out how much you'd have in savings. So we find that when we're 42 years old, we should have $77,000 in retirement savings. Now what if we use the other equation, and we use that it had been 20 years since we began saving? Well, since this W represents the number of years since we began saving, since we were 22, let's go ahead and substitute a 20 in for this variable, which represents how long we've been saving. So we get K equals 5,000 plus 3,600 times 20. Now it should be no surprise with a quick glance to the left that of course we're going to end up with the exact same number. And that's reassuring. And it just goes to show that with two different equations with slightly differently defined variables, we can come up with the exact same answer. Okay, let's turn our focus to the second question. How many years will it take you to amass $127,400 in retirement savings, and how old will you be? So the first one I want to look at is, how old will you be? So when we see that, let's use our first equation, and all we're going to do is we're going to substitute $127,400 in for our retirement. So we have $127,400 equals that 5,000 we started with, plus 3,600 a year, times h minus 22. And now all we have to do is, if we can solve for that variable h, we'll know exactly how old we are when we reach 127,400 in savings. And after doing some steps with this equation, we end up with 34 equals h minus 22, and we find that we will be 56 years old when we reach that mark in savings. So, if we look at our second equation and we substitute that same number in for our savings right here, we end up with 127,400 equals 5,000 plus 3,600 times W. And this W represents how many years you've been saving, or how long it's been since you were 22 years old. And when you solve this equation, you find 34 equals W. And note that this doesn't mean that your age is 34. This means it's 34 years since you started saving at 22 years old. So of course, that means you'll be 56. We end up with the exact same answer.